So it's great to be with everyone today. I promise that Renee and I did not plan this out. Renee ended his remarks with, "We can do this." I've framed up my remarks around the idea that we must do this. We're going to be in big trouble if we don't. We as a world, we as a country, we as human beings, and we don't really have a choice anymore. And so if you all have another meeting a little bit through this, you've heard the kind of bottom line, so I won't feel bad. But that's really the crux of it, right? We don't really have a choice anymore but to be successful. And that's what I'm going to focus on today. So this was the title of the talk that we put in the program a little bit ago. As I was preparing these remarks, some colleagues of mine thinking to Paul and our colleagues here from the UK that a better title for this talk might be Mind the Material Gap. And you will understand why we're talking about this here in a minute. The beginning set of remarks were really focused on biosolutions. I'm going to take a step back and focus on the global chemical industry for a minute and say, let's just talk about chemicals and materials. For those of you that know me, I am a chemist, and I focus on things really from I love enzymes too. Enzymes are really sort of big, fancy chemical catalysts that have evolved over time. At the end of the day, what we are talking about is manufacturing some sort of chemical or material. And if we take even low-level estimates of the chemical industry, we talk about what's huge, right? Look at Blair. In the context of the chemicals industry, Blair's small. Right? We're talking about $1 trillion in sales, right? Renee referenced a $2 trillion bioeconomy as a projection. This is $1 trillion in sales from the top 50 firms today. This is what's going on right now. And this is really the focal point that we, I think, as this industry need to start thinking about, that we are working here, not here. But this is really a risky endeavor. And so when you think about what the global chemicals industry looks like, you start to think about the complex movements across the globe of a lot of material. And these are just two examples that you can sort of pull from anywhere, right? We remember the COVID mask shortage from now a few years ago, right? If you track back where that actually came from, the real shortage came from the downward trajectory of fuel markets. Right? That's where that came from. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. We had a ship blocking the Suez Canal for a while, right? That made big news and gummed up global supply chains for years, right? One ship. I'll talk a little about BioMADE and my organization in a minute toward the end of the talk, but we spend a lot of time thinking about both economic security, economic growth, the chemicals industry, but also national security implications. And so we work a lot with the US Department of Defense, and as we do that, right, we think about an organization that really thinks deeply about its supply chains, but supply chains are complicated. This was a story in the Washington Post last year that talks about fuel from a naval base, right, in the Indian Ocean. And you only have to go a few steps back to say, oh, well, that fuel came from a refinery in Greece. Well, where did that fuel get its crude from? Its crude came, well, from Turkey, but really it came from Russia, right? And this is while the US had embargoes. And this is a Department of Defense facility. And there's a focus here on looking at supply chains. This is really hard even when you're paying attention. There's no real way to think about supply chains far enough back, and that's kind of the point here. And so if we think about sort of an airplane with some sort of paint or coating, we can oversimplify things and say it comes from, a series of components, pigments, resins, et cetera, right? We can take that back to some chemical and inorganic chemical precursors, right? We can go one step back. And today, mostly that comes from petroleum and mining, and we know, right? And there's some examples that come from this industry, but for the most part, it comes from petroleum and mining. To me, this isn't far enough back, right? Where did it really come from? It came from the Big Bang. Right? So how far back do we look? How are we thinking about the chemicals industry? Let's talk about fuel for a minute. Let's talk about energy in the context of chemicals, right? Things that we, I think, in this industry generally know and pay attention to are that refineries and refining petroleum mostly yields fuel, right? Here you see 75% between gasoline and fuel oil, right? You've got roughly 75% of the volume. If we go to the petrochemical feedstocks, you're looking at about a 1%, right? You remember the COVID mask slide I had a few minutes ago, and I said, what is the problem? Well, the problem really was the fuel industry. The problem was the downward trajectory of fuel. Well, the feedstocks that the suits and masks manufacturers needed, the raw industrial chemicals, came from petroleum refineries that all shut down because global transportation tanked. Demand signal super high, didn't matter, right? Maybe never higher, right? Didn't matter. And we got to remember, 1% of consumption is still a lot, right? We're still talking about massive volumes here, right? Midwest, we love big trains. I love big trains, right? This train car to Nebraska is long, right? Focused on this one sort of area. And we know that chemicals and materials go into everything, right? We had 3 wonderful examples earlier, and that is where we have to focus and what we have to think about. But now what's the problem, right? I said, so sort of mind the material gap. Where are we going? Why do we have to be successful? Well, a Bloomberg projection looking out for the next 20 years shows what's happening to fuel markets, right? So the blue line on this chart shows what's happening to gasoline, right? And the green line shows what's happening to road diesel, right? These are headed down. And we just said that 75% of the volume in petroleum refineries going to these areas, right? And that is what drives the supply, right? It's demand for these products. Now, yeah, you can see jet fuel going up. Look, the red line, right? Chemical feedstocks going up. Renee pointed out that we are growing the number of people on planet Earth, right? That means that consumption is going up, right? I haven't even started to talk about sustainability yet. This is just the raw numbers, right? Okay. You don't believe Bloomberg, fine, right? Even OECD, the projections for gas are going down, right? OECD is saying that these numbers are going down. So where are the chemicals and materials going to come from to supply all of the goods that we need? Remember, 1% consumption is still a lot. It's still a big amount. When we think about supply even, right? I've spent a bunch of time focusing on demand, right? We can look at ExxonMobil's trajectory for supply, right? Okay, US, North America is gonna be a growing net exporter, fine. The amount of consumption is so high that it almost doesn't matter. If you look at, oh, my favorite slide, I almost forgot about it. And this is all at the same time we're having a big conversation in the US and around the world about energy production, right? And so if we take the current production of ethylene, right, it takes 135 terawatt hours basically to crack to get ethylene, right? But most of the energy conversation, at least in the media, is around data centers. Spent a lot of time reading about data centers. I'll talk a little bit about some infrastructure work that BioMADE is doing. And all I hear about is, oh no, we don't have energy for you because it's going to a data center, right? It's going to these places because you need that energy for big tech, which have all of the money to feed in. And let's not forget, 135 terawatt hours, that's 4 Palo Verde nuclear power plants. This is the largest nuclear power plant in the United States, and it takes 4 of them, and you get 2, that'll feed 2 tech companies. So where's the energy gonna come from, right? So now we have a problem with the material supply. We also have a problem with energy if we're going to keep doing it the same way. The International Energy Agency, the executive director has this statement that I sort of can't help but read and reread. I'm going to edit it slightly for this audience and read it differently, right? Our economies are heavily dependent on chemicals, but the sector receives far less attention than it deserves. Chemicals are one of the key blind spots in the global energy debate, especially given the influence they will exert on future energy trends, right? Everything I just talked about says that we in this room and in this community have to be successful. I spend an awful lot of my time thinking about this problem, this particular problem, and I spend a lot of time going out there and trying to find possible solutions. I have yet to find a solution other than industrial uses of biology that actually solve this problem at a relevant scale. The scale we just talked about is so massive that there are few technologies on planet Earth that can actually do this. Well, it turns out, so I wish Renee did not take his ear of corn, because then now would be my, I can hold up my ear of corn and say, where's the carbon going to come from? Well, we're actually pretty good at that part. Like, we're really good at growing that part. We're actually really good at innovating in the basic and fundamental sciences that go into manufacturing chemicals, right? But we have a really hard time making them at a scale that hits the $1 trillion global chemicals industry. And there are a lot of reasons for that. There are technical hurdles, there are education hurdles, there are personnel hurdles, there are legacy, like fighting a legacy industry hurdles, right? There are a lot of hurdles that go into that. But the crux of it is, we don't have a choice. So, the downer part of this talk is now over. I want to tell you a little bit about how at least we at BioMADE are thinking about and trying to solve this problem. And so, very much unlike Novonesis, BioMADE is a brand new organization. We're only a few years old. BioMADE is a nonprofit public-private partnership catalyzed by the US government, the US Department of Defense primarily, but I'll come back to that in a minute, really to help organize around solving the problems I just outlined in the early half of this presentation, right? There's been an immense amount of work led by a lot of the people in this room to try to start solving these problems. But if we don't pick up the pace, we're going to find ourselves at 2040 and 2050 really regretting that we didn't pick up the pace. And this is what BioMADE was catalyzed and is established to be doing. So BioMADE spends time really focused on this core problem, and how do we build a sustainable, domestic, end-to-end industrial biomanufacturing ecosystem. This is why it's great that Paul brought BioInnovations Midwest. By the way, BioInnovations Midwest, 3 words in a row, solid naming for what this industry needs right now. So well done. BioMADE is intended to push on these levers. BioMADE does this really by helping coordinate and drive the broader community, and we do that as a membership organization. So BioMADE has now members that have joined us, including a lot of the companies and organizations that are here today. We look forward to chatting with you, as well as many who are not. Right? BioMADE was established by the US government, so we're very much focused on the United States, which is why we have the US map here. The US map of 37 states, right? We have 13 to go. These are the types of things that can be done everywhere, and we know that, right? We have a big tent strategy to bring everyone in, do some organization, and drive forward. We're pushing nearly 300 members now. Coming from some of the largest companies, right, including some of the companies that were on the stage a minute ago and are here, as well as the smaller startups that are building up. There's room for universities. Some of my favorite work comes out of the community college work that we do in education and workforce development. We have room for nonprofits. We have room for K through 12 school districts, right? How do we really get a focus on the areas that we care about and are talking about? And we do this by working in 4 primary programmatic areas. So BioMADE was initially established with a large grant from the US government. And most of that funding goes to these 4 areas. So technology and innovation, we, through a co-investment strategy, work with our members to help advance underlying tools and technologies that build this field. We run programs in education and workforce development that can drive the field forward. And we do that while caring about safety, security, sustainability, and building businesses in a socially responsible way. Our head of programs, Dr. Melanie Tomczyk, is here, and I encourage you to talk to her, and she's going to wave her hand awkwardly because I called on someone in the audience. We do this at a relatively large scale, so we now have more than $170 million deployed, over 76 projects. We have nearly 70 companies and organizations engaged in this effort really across the country. I want to just go through very quickly a couple examples of the types of work that we do. The purpose here is not to get into a bunch of different underlying technologies, but is really to show the scope, right? And so, right, everything from the ideas of converting waste to value-added products, and so, you know, thinking about dairy whey through really thinking about the microbiology and molecular biology that's needed, thinking about scale-up and cost models, and doing modeling so that you can skip some steps in the scale-up process, projects related to that. Downstream processing, a huge and important area. How are we thinking about innovations in downstream processing that can help the industry as a whole, projects going on there. Underlying machine learning and process optimization, we're gonna need some of those data centers that I was talking about before, driving there, right? These are just samplings of the number of projects that we have ongoing. And we're not just focused on these technology areas, we're focused on thinking about how we create business conditions that allow us to be more successful. And so that covers really all areas of non-technical risk as well. We think about what are the barriers to success in the industry, and that covers everything from piloting to IP to regulatory issues to workforce issues. And at BioMADE, we have the ability to both convene and coordinate and work with the US government and work with state governments in some cases to really make sure that the best information is put forward to lead to the best opportunities for success, right? It includes understanding the business case, as well as building the workforce that we need to power the overall industry. We are very excited to keep this moving, and we are excited to be here. I'm gonna end this by talking a little bit about a program that we've just launched and that we'd love to interact with you a little bit on today, and that's related to pilot and intermediate scale biomanufacturing infrastructure. And so one of the things we've heard from our companies since before the beginning of BioMADE, since this was just an idea, something we were trying to put together, is that in the US, really, and around the world, there is a dearth of pilot and intermediate scale infrastructure for companies to access, right? We've heard this from companies large and small. And so we, through a large scale organization effort, worked with the US Congress as well as a bunch of state legislatures to start to think about what would it be like to establish a network of pilot and intermediate scale infrastructure here in the US. And do this in a networked and coordinated fashion in a way that can build this, as I said, diversified and specialized infrastructure needed. We kind of went out on a limb and went to the US Congress and said, for the low cost of $1.5 billion, you too can have a pilot plant network in the US. And fortunately, they did not laugh us out of the room. We had a really productive and engaged conversation to the point where We've now been allocated $400 million to establish this network. And we see that increasing from here. We announced that we're focusing on the state of Minnesota for an initial facility. That comes from additional resourcing from the state of Minnesota at the state level, a pool of up to $100 million to establish that. Things are moving incredibly fast in this area, and we'll be talking more about that in the coming months. We are also now thinking about what are number 2 and 3 and beyond. We see this as a real opportunity here in the US. And so we've also announced these 6 additional states that we are spending real time and effort focused on. We want to talk to everyone about what the needs are that could potentially be in these states. It does not matter if you are actually located there or not, right? We can walk to Iowa from here. We really need that level of engagement. And so really the last slide I have is, if we think about the supply chain problems and the solutions we must bring to the table, we can actually do it. The people in this room can do it. Those that have been focused on this industry for a long time and the newcomers together can do it. And I think that we have an opportunity to do it together. And so I want to say thank you to Paul and to those of you that are here. We have a number of colleagues from BioMADE that are available to chat with you about anything I discussed and more, and look forward to having a great rest of the meeting. Thank you.